Trump just issued a massive threat to the BRICS nations, warning them not to challenge the US dollar. But what if I told you this fight is much bigger than anyone realizes, and it could change the global financial system forever? Now, the BRICS nations, they've been making headlines about potential bold moves to reshape the world order. This isn't just about a new currency, as many think. It's about a deeper, smarter strategy that could undermine the dollar's dominance without firing a single shot. And Trump's threats, well, they're more than a headline. They reveal just how fragile the current system has become, and most people, they're not ready for what's about to happen. So in this video, I'm gonna break down the details of what Trump's warning was. I'm gonna expose the game-changing strategy that BRICS is using to reduce the reliance on the dollar, and I'm gonna show you how this global shift could impact your life and your wealth, and why this could be one of the most important financial stories of our lifetime. Now, the global financial system, it's changing. And if you don't understand how this global power play could affect your investments, your savings, and even the price of things you buy every day, you're gonna get left behind. But for those of us that do, we get the upper hand, while others struggle to catch up. Now, real quick before we jump in, my name is Mark Moss. I've been a tech-focused VC investor for over a decade. I've been creating Bitcoin educational content since it was only about $300. Today, I'm a partner at a leading Bitcoin VC hedge fund. I coach business owners on investing, and I'm sharing some of the same data we use to make long-term decisions. So let's go. All right, let's just jump right in and let's talk about what just happened. The warning shot that went around the world. I'm talking about President-elect Trump. He's not even in office yet, but he's already making big moves, and he's making global threats. Now, he made a warning to the BRICS nations right here. Let me pull it up so you can see exactly what this tweet means, and then, of course, we'll break it all down and tell you what it means to you and what we should be doing about this. Okay, the idea that the BRICS countries, of course, I've talked a lot about the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. A lot of other nations have jumped in. I've done a bunch of videos on this. They're starting their own currency, getting out of the US dollar, etc. The BRICS countries are trying to move away from the dollar while we stand by and watch. It's over, he says. Hey, these days are over. They're not doing it on our watch, not while we watch. It says we require commitment. Neither should they create a new BRICS currency, nor back any other currency to replace the mighty US dollar, or they will face 100% tariffs. So that's the threat. Hey, if you stop using the dollar or go to any other currency, we're going to slap 100% tariffs on you. And they can also say goodbye to selling into the wonderful US. It's just kind of weird. So how do you put 100% tariffs on if they can't sell into the U.S.? Anyway, I'm not going to get into that. But that is basically it. He says they can go find another sucker. There's no chance that the BRICS will replace the U.S. dollar in international trade. And any country that tries should wave goodbye to America. So he's basically saying, if you don't use the U.S. dollar, then you can kiss the American markets goodbye. I put a tweet that went pretty viral. I said, tell me you don't understand incentives and game theory without saying it. A lot of people didn't like that, told me to stay in my lane, which I don't know what my lane is. I thought this was my lane. Let's talk about this. What's the significance of this threat? And let's talk about the de-dollarization efforts. So we can see some of the headlines that talk about this now. He's threatening the BRICS nations here, threatening to impose 100% tariffs on there. And of course, this isn't the first time he's talked about tariffs. We've seen him talking about tariffs with China as well. And speaking of China, the BRICS are not the first nations to do this. As a matter of fact, both China and Russia have been de-dollarizing since 2013. So over a decade, they've actively been doing this. This is from the U.S. Congressional Research Service. This is from 2021 this came out, and it talks about for more than a decade, in 2021 more than a decade, China and Russia have sought to reduce their use of the US dollar or to de-dollarize. So the whole world's been doing this. China and Russia, two of the largest countries in the world, have been doing this now for over a decade, since 2021. And of course, Russia got completely de-dollarized when they got kicked out of the global financial system. So this is not a new thing. And what we can see here from this chart right here is you can actually see how this has been playing out. So for example, going back to 2013, the date that I gave you, you can see in red the Russian ruble has gone up a little bit. The green here is the US dollar. So while the US dollar was 100%, roughly back in 2013, about 98%, you can see how quickly it started to fall off of a cliff right here. Today we are just at about 30%. Meanwhile, the euro picked up a big chunk, and then others right there. So the world is de-dollarizing, whether Trump wants it to or not. And here's the key takeaway. the government doesn't tell us what money we want to use. I can pay you in dollars, I can pay you in euro, yen, I can pay you with my iPhone, I can pay you with my labor. You and I decide what we want to trade. Now, as you can see, this is changing rapidly. Now, this all fits into my 3 cycles thesis of the 80-year financial revolution cycle, the 250-year political revolution cycle, and the 50-year technological revolution cycle. That's playing out exactly like I've been laying out for the last couple years. If you want to know how these 3 cycles come together, but more specifically, give us an exact detailed blueprint of how to invest over the next year, then come check out next week. I have a link down below. Come hang out. I'm going to show you about 50, 60 slides. I'll answer all your questions live. If you want to take advantage of what's happening in the markets over the next year, you need to understand these cycles. All right, but let me show you what the BRICS is doing next. Okay, now why does this matter to the U.S.? Why is Trump so mad about this? Why would other nations care? But specifically the dollar. The dollar is the reserve currency of the world. As Trump said, no more playing us as suckers. If you don't use the dollar, say goodbye to America. Why? Well, because of the decreasing demand for the U.S. dollar. Now we can see that what the BRICS are doing here is that there's growing economic and demographic heft. So they're trying to, as the BRICS get bigger, as all these nations are forming this coalition, that's what it is, a coalition. We'll get to that point in a minute. 10 BRICS countries now comprise more than a quarter of the global economy and half of the world's population. So the coalition, this loose organization of a bunch of nations, are half of the world's population, not a small number of people. And but here's the problem. This growing membership, all these ragtag countries with all these different policies and things they want to do, it brings new challenges, including increasing pushback from Western countries and divisions within the bloc. So not only do Western nations like Europe and the US not like this and push back like what Trump is doing, but even within them, they don't trust each other. Each one has their own interests. Which one wants to win? Which one wants to be the most dominant? And so there's a lot of challenges that are here. Now we can see that some of the things that they want to do, the reasons why they're trying to do this, is again, if they can coordinate their economic policy, then hopefully what they could do is they could reduce the reliance on the US dollar, right? Again, this is what Trump is warning from. The BRICS leaders have long advocated for de-dollarization, but again, it's not just the BRICS. China and Russia have been doing this for a long time. It's what happens when the U.S. continues to weaponize the dollar over and over. Now, the thing is, though, is it's not what most people think. You see, what most people have been talking about for a long time, I've made videos talking about this, is that the BRICS want to launch their own currency. And that's what Trump was saying, if they launch their own currency. But that's not what the BRICS are doing. The BRICS are doing something much more different. What? Well, they want to create an alternative financial system. So they're not trying to create a new currency. They're trying to create an entire new financial system. Now, what they've created is this New Development Bank, or NDB, and a Contingent Reserve Arrangement, the CRA. And basically what they want to do is they want to replace the World Bank and the IMF. So the NDB mimics the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. And they hope that alternative lending would reduce dependence on traditional funding sources, again, the IMF and the World Bank. They want to reduce that. Why? Well, we'll get to why when we talk about the difference of what this alternative system can do. But ultimately, it's intended to offer more flexibility, greater equality among shareholders, and easier access to funds than the World Bank. You see, when the World Bank and the IMF give out loans, those loans come with strings. You do what we want, do what we say, or you don't get any money. Like, for example, shut down your entire energy sector. For example, don't grow your own food. And that's obviously bad for the nation. Why would we want to have no energy? We don't want to live in the dark ages, but if we want the money, we have to do that. And so all this money comes with strings. The bank has approved more, so now going back to the NDB, they want to give money without the strings. The NDB has approved more than $32 billion for 96 projects since it began in 2016. $32 billion sounds like a lot of money, but since 2016, not that long. The NDB is more than 5 times smaller than the World Bank. So even though the BRICS nations make up more than half of the world's population, the NDB bank is 5 times smaller than the World Bank. And it says that the redesign of the global financial system have fallen short as it maintains many of the practices of its competitors. So they're trying to create this alternative system, but in many ways, it's almost the same way. And a lot of people stop right there and don't see what this next chapter is. But let me break this down. Now, I've done several videos on this already over the years, and I'm talking about this new financial system, specifically around Project Enbridge, which is a project that the BIS, Bank of International Settlements, has worked on with many countries. Now, this is dated November of 2024. Project Enbridge reached the minimum viable product stage in mid-2024. That means it now works. They can now use it, the minimum viable product. The CBDC platform shared among participants, participating central banks and commercial banks. Enbridge was a result of extensive collaboration starting in 2021 between the BIS, the Bank of International Settlements, it's the central bank of all central banks, the Bank of Thailand, Central Bank of the United Arab Emirates, UAE, we'll come back to that, the People's Bank of China, of course, Hong Kong Monetary Authority, and the Saudi Central Bank. We'll come back to that as well. It also addressed financial inclusion concerns. Now, they don't want to just create a duplicate system. They need to create a new alternative system, and it's not about creating their own currency. It's about creating a new system to move money around. Now, again, while this sounds promising, I do want to just keep in mind that while their population is massive, the amount of economic heft that they have is relatively small. So we can see like India has this massive population, but only 3% of GDP. Whereas the United States has only 4% of the world population, but 26% of GDP. The rest of the BRICS don't even register as a percent of GDP. And so while they seem to be threatening the US dollar, you have to keep in mind it is relatively small, but don't overlook that. So while it looks small, keep in mind it's just the beginning. Now, another reason why they want to do this is if they decrease demand for US dollar, they reduce the US leverage, right? So if they're not using the US dollar can't be weaponized against them. And not just weaponized against them like sanctions, but more importantly, it's this, the seigniorage. It was a Chinese official that said about a year ago, I put it in a video, where he said that the US is able to print a $100 bill for like 17 cents and send it to another country and extract $100 worth of goods for 17 cents. That's what seigniorage is. So it's unequal distribution of benefits, because whoever prints the money gets the unequal distribution. It creates inflation for the rest of the world, so the U.S. exports that inflation. It creates economic distortions, and so that is what these nations are trying to get out of. But again, it's not about creating their own currency. So if it's not about creating their own currency, what are they really trying to do? Well, it's a new strategy, right? It's not about creating a new currency. It's about creating a new strategy altogether. So you can see Western sanctions, the US dollar status as global reserve currency are part of the story. Washington's immense influence over the global financial system. So they want to get out of that, but they want to do this not by creating their own currency. They want to do this by each country having their own national currency and then being able to just use their own currencies and trade between them. So instead of trying to figure out which currency they use, they'll each get to use their own, and they'll use Project Enbridge, the new CBD system, to trade their own currencies. That's the way they want to do it. And really, you have China, which is the largest player, obviously, in the BRICS, with a massive share of global GDP. But what China's doing is different than what the U.S. is doing. What China's doing is saying, hey, we're the biggest, we have the biggest GDP, but we're not going to tell you what to do. We're going to give everybody equal say and equal rights, because we're not going to make you use the Chinese yuan. Everyone can just use their own currency, and we'll just settle through Project Enbridge. So the China has taken a much different approach. While Trump is trying to threaten them, what China does is cooperation. Let's all just work together, as opposed to competing competition. And even more importantly, going back to the NDB, it's sort of like the IMF. The difference is, again, the IMF comes with all these political strings, whereas the NDB are loans with no politics. And so that's really what the BRICS are doing. They're not trying to create a new currency. They're trying to create a new system where they can all have their own say, where nobody has an advantage, where they can get loans without political strings, and they don't have to worry about countries imposing seigniorage on them and shipping inflation to them. And that is what we're seeing. Now, again, we all decide what we want to use as money. And so while the BRICS are not creating their own currency, what they are doing is they're taking their surplus, their savings, and instead of moving it into U.S. treasuries like they used to, now they're moving it into gold. For example, you can see since 2013, since the de-dollarization happened, you can see central banks have been net buyers of gold, and they've been net sellers of U.S. treasuries. And so nations, central banks around the world now, are buying gold instead of U.S. treasuries. So the de-dollarization is happening, whether Trump wants it to or not, and he's misunderstanding that it's global cooperation, equal participation that's really driving this and wanting to get away from the weaponization. And by threatening more weaponization, it's really not going to do the trick. Now, what's the global impact of this globally, and what does this mean to us? Well, globally, what this means is that we are definitely moving to a multipolar financial system. Again, the US dollar is the reserve standard of the world, and it's going to continue to be that way for a while. However, as I already showed you, the share of global trade is falling off of a cliff, and that will continue to happen. So what happens when that happens? Well, it'll affect global trade patterns. So for example, as I said, the US has the seigniorage. They can print $100 for next to nothing and send that over and extract goods. But as the dollar's dominance continues to go down, the US won't enjoy as much seigniorage, and that'll change the way that global trade happens all over the world. It'll also influence prices and economic stability throughout the world. So as other nations are moving away from U.S. treasuries and being afraid they'll be weaponized against them and moving reserves to other assets like gold, it changes the power of balance and the stability. Now we can see that one of the ways we're seeing this is we can see like Bitcoin has broke $93,000 amid rumors that Saudi Arabia, the UAE, or Qatar are buying. And so now we're seeing these BRICS nations. These are nations, Saudi, UAE, I told you, that are part of Project Enbridge. And now they're moving into global commodities that people can't control, like gold and like Bitcoin. We can also see countries like Russia, who have been de-dollarizing for over a decade, and now, like I said, kicked out of the system. Russia's digital assets challenge Western sanctions. So this is a newly legalized cryptocurrency sector, marks a major shift in the Kremlin's approach to evading sanctions and undermining the US dollar. And so this just came out November 21st of this year. So we can see that these nations, these BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, etc., they're starting to move to a new system. Again, not trying to replace the dollar, each nation being able to save in gold or Bitcoin or whatever they want and use their own currencies through a Project Enbridge type platform. Okay, so now that you understand that, it's not about a new currency, it's about reshaping the global financial system. What does that mean for us, and how do we navigate this? More importantly, how do we profit from this? Well, a couple things. Number one, we have to understand that our savings, in specifically dollars for us as Americans, they're going to continue to buy us less and less goods. Right? So in the future, your savings will continue to buy you less and less goods. So you're going to have to learn how to offset that. The reason why is we're going to see inflation in the goods and services. So all of this decentralization that's happening is going to make global trade prices go up. So goods and services will cost more money, as well as when the global demand for dollars goes down, the U.S. is going to have to buy more of their own currency by printing it, which will cause inflation. So those two things are going to cause a massive amount of inflation. We'll see fiat inflation because more central banks are going to be printing more currency. Now, we're also going to see, we're already starting to see, I've been talking about for 2 years, a shift away from fiat savings and even equities and into commodities. Why? Because all of these countries, the BRICS nations, they're buying commodities. They're buying gold. They're holding uranium in the ground. They're holding oil. Russia's done really well with their oil, Saudi Arabia, et cetera. And they're moving to digital assets like Bitcoin as well. And so we're going to be getting out of these things, moving into commodities around the world, and digital currencies are going to continue to rise. Now, this plays out perfectly with the 50-year cycle I've been talking about, this quantum wave leap, where there's 4 phases over a 50-year period where the entire global financial system changes, right? We have the 80-year financial cycle, the 50-year tech cycle, and it's all converging right now. If you want to understand how these 4 phases of the cycle work out, and more importantly, how to invest for these 4 phases, I'm going to do a live presentation next week. I'm going to show you all the charts, all the graphs. I'm going to lay out the blueprint that you can follow. If you want to make more money than you can imagine over the next year, you want to come. I'll show you all the charts and graphs. It's all for free. I'll answer all your questions live so you can figure out how to deploy that into your own strategy. And it's fun. Come hang out. There's a link down below. Like I said, it's free. Come check it out. Otherwise, don't sleep on this. The world is changing. The global financial system is changing. And there's going to be two types of people. Those who see it and take advantage of it, and those who get left behind. Don't get left behind. That's what I got. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. To your success. I'm out.